All right. So we're out here hitting the NBA free agency market, talking about some big moves. Let's just open up with the two biggest, I would say. KD, Kyrie, the drama that was supposed to be going to the New York Knicks, decide, no, let's go make a super team in Brooklyn instead. McClure, how do you think that's going to change the overall landscape so far in the NBA?
Well, that move, I think, surprised everybody that they went to the Brooklyn Nets. You heard all offseason during free agency that they were looking at the Knicks, and the Knicks, cleared cap space to grab two all-stars. And what do? They do what the Knicks do. They absolutely fail and not get the job done, not bring in one guy that you'd say, wait, that's an all-star that can help us win right now. You don't have that guy on the New York Knicks. And if you're the Brooklyn Nets coming off a season where you were the 6th seed in the Eastern Conference and really battled against the Philadelphia 76ers team in the playoffs, had a great season, you add those two guys. Obviously, KD is going to be out for all of this year. And, if you're a Nets fan, you can't be reminiscing on that, I believe, this year. You can't be reminiscing that KD will not be there this year. This is your squad. You got Kyrie and those guys you assembled, from last year's team and in the offseason. So I don't want to hear about KD this year. I don't want to hear it. So, the Nets are going to be really good in the future, and they built something now. And that just completely changed the landscape of the NBA, like you said, Dolby, especially in the Eastern Conference. Now that really is a toss-up in the East.
Not only does it bring two major stars over the East, but it pushes a young rising star over to the Western Conference in D'Angelo Russell. He's going to play a major factor for the Golden State Warriors this upcoming season, especially with Klay Thompson out probably until March, I would say, maybe a little bit after that. We'll see if he can get ready. He's a shooter, but he plays really good defense, so he's going to have to be agile. He's going to have to be 100% for this team to feel comfortable bringing him back. We'll see what happens with D'Angelo Russell now that he's on a super team. Last year, he kind of had to do it himself for the Brooklyn Nets. They made the playoffs. They played really well. They played their hearts out. We'll see what he does going over to the West. Now, we have another super team, one of the more interesting and one of the more exciting big twos that the NBA has shifted towards in Houston. With CP3 is out, he's in Oklahoma City, and Russell Westbrook is in, playing alongside his buddy James Harden, who he has chemistry with from years ago, back whenever they made their finals run with KD, Harden, Westbrook, that big team that got taken down by Miami in the finals. Now Westbrook and Harden teaming up once again. I think this team is going to be one heck of a regular season squad, especially with D'Antoni's offense, with his offense that he runs. I mean, how are people going to outscore this team? All you have to do is score one more point than your opponent, and it seems like you look at any other team basically in the NBA, how are they going to hang with this high-scoring, high-flying Houston Rockets team?
Dolby, I love this move for the Houston Rockets, and I'll tell you why. People are saying that, Russell Westbrook, he's too ball dominant, and when you combine that with James Harden, things aren't going to, do well. These guys, like you said, these guys got chemistry. They played in Oklahoma City for years. They almost took down that Miami Heat team. They went to the finals, and they're going to make this thing work in Houston. I'm telling you that right now. This is the best point guard, arguably the best point guard in the entire NBA. He goes 100 miles an hour. He can go to the rack. Now, I think he needs to work on his three-point shooting, but this guy is a freight train, man. I mean, this guy goes hard. He's a big-time player. I think he's much better than Chris Paul right now. Chris Paul, when he was with Houston, he was kind of playing a lot off the ball. You saw it a lot. You wanted him to be somebody that was on the ball, but he wasn't. I mean, he was out there in the corner and on the wing trying to create when Harden was out at the point. Now you got two guys that can do what Harden does, Harden and Westbrook, who can just create their own shot, get to the rack, and dominate. And I think that when you add that together, man, it's going to be insane. It's going to be great. For Houston, I think, like you said, they're going to be amazing in the regular season, but the playoffs are a different animal. And if they can work some things out, because obviously not everything's going to be 100% right during the regular season. So, I love this move for Houston. I think they're a legitimate contender in the West in the regular season. And when the playoffs come, I think they're going to be right there and have an opportunity to get to the NBA Finals in 2019.
I just love the fact that they dumped CP3 and his albatross contract. They took on another big contract, big money, a lot of years contract with Russell Westbrook. But I feel a lot more confident in Russell Westbrook's body than I do CP3, his body and his skill set and his mentality, because towards the end of the season and during the offseason, Harden, who is the unquestioned star there, he's the number one, he's the alpha male on this basketball team. He really wasn't getting along with CP3 towards the end of it. He was tired of it. He was tired of the injuries. He was tired of the excuses. Now they bring in Russell Westbrook, who is a no BS kind of player. He's out there, tongue out, flying through the air. He doesn't even care. He's going to slam it on your face all day long. He's going to give you 150,000% of anything that he has. He will sweat himself to death before he accepts a loss. So that's what you need if you're going to take the next step in the playoffs or even the next step in the regular season. You need a guy like this with a high motor, high intensity, somebody who just loves to play ball. And it seems like CP3 is much more concerned with his off the court ventures. He thinks he's LeBron James mini. Just because you ride on the same banana boat as this guy in the offseason does not mean that you are this dude. CP3, you got to work on your game, man, because you're going to a squad in OKC that isn't looking good. And to transition to there, the OKC lost their big star. Well, I guess they're two big stars. They traded their two biggest stars away, Russ Westbrook, who was a franchise favorite, and Paul George, who had been there for the past couple years, signed an extension with them, seemed like he was ready to move forward with that franchise, like they were ready to take the next step and finally recover from those few down years that they had with just Westbrook. They finally had their other star. He's a great two-way player. He can do it all. And now they boot him to the Los Angeles Clippers, who formed another super team. Imagine that. So now PG-13 getting moved to LA. They get some resources back. They get a lot of draft capital for the next few years, which draft picks, they're going to be the Clippers draft picks. So the Clippers are going to be good. And they get Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who was he was the big motivating factor, as well as Danilo Gallinari, who is a good player. He's a nice player. He's a good complementary guy who can do a lot of things for you on offense. He's a good spark plug that way. But you lose so much star power if you're OKC. I don't see them recovering. McClure, do you think that maybe all the analysts are wrong? Maybe it isn't the Clippers that made out big on this trade, and maybe Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is the guy?
Well, you can't say that right now just because, you don't know how these draft picks are going to be in the next few years for the Oklahoma City Thunder. And I think their mindset was like, we can't even get past the first round with Russell Westbrook and Paul George. I mean, these guys are two legitimate players in the NBA All-Stars. They couldn't get past the first round, couldn't get past the Jazz, 2 years ago. And last year they stunk against the Blazers. I mean, so they were probably like, Sam Presti was like, hey, if Russell Westbrook wants to get traded, that's fine because these guys haven't produced in the playoffs. Let's take a step back. Let's rebuild a little bit. And I think they've done, and they got some players that are seasoned vets. Danilo Gallinari and Chris Paul, as much as, me and you probably don't like him, he is a veteran in this league. He was an all-star in New Orleans. He had some pretty good years in Houston. I mean, this is a guy who's a pretty decent leader to have on your squad. And then you add somebody in Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who I think overperformed in his rookie year for the Clippers. I mean, that's not a bad core squad to have. It's going to be, but in the future, it's going to be about the draft picks, who you bring in free agency to complement, maybe one of your all-star draft picks, and we'll see how it goes. But I think it's going to be a really long season for the Oklahoma City Thunder this year and maybe in the next upcoming years, because probably Chris Paul won't be there in 3 years. So it's going to be a long rebuild, I think, for Oklahoma City. But hey, they did it before. They drafted KD and Russell Westbrook. See what happens. And you never know. You never know. And this team is going to be rebuilding and continue to rebuild until they find something right.
All right, now moving on to the last big trade of the NBA offseason. Mike Conley getting moved to the Utah Jazz from the Memphis Grizzlies, where he was for his entire career. He was very impressive. He carried that franchise for a long time. Him and Marc Gasol now gone. He brings a lot of grit and grind to the Utah Jazz, and all they had to do was give up Kyle Korver, Jay Crowder, a draft pick, and Grayson Allen. So I don't think they're really going to miss those guys for as much as they're going to get back from Mike Conley, even not so much in the twilight of his career. He's only 31 years old. He has had injuries in the past, but to get that point guard number one to put alongside Donovan Mitchell, who's more of a true shooting guard, ball dominant as he is, that's the position he needs to play. And now this roster is really filling out nicely for Utah. I think they take a really big step up next year in the Western Conference, and primarily due to the fact that they picked up Mike Conley, one of the premier point guards in the league. McClure, what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it was a good deal for the Utah Jazz, bringing in a veteran and Mike Conley, somebody that can, be a floor general out there for the Utah Jazz. And this is a Utah Jazz team that I think a lot of people are really high on. I think a lot of people are thinking that Donovan Mitchell is going to take that next step and be that all-star in the playoffs. Now, he's had 2 great seasons, but I think the Jazz think that this guy's going to make that next step. And if he does that, this Utah Jazz team is going to be really good. You got Joe Ingles still. You got Rudy Gobert. You shifted Favors somewhere else. But, hey, this is a really deep, good Utah Jazz team, and I like the Mike Conley move, bringing him in, maybe mentoring Donovan Mitchell a little bit, and we'll see what happens. But this Utah Jazz team, don't sleep on them, people. They're going to be good.